The worst kind of betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people you've loved the longest, the ones who should know your heart better than anyone else. I never imagined my son would be one of them. It all started on a cold November morning. I had just been discharged from the hospital after a minor stroke. The doctor warned me I needed rest, medication, and someone to help around the house while I recovered. The first person I thought of was my son, Eric. My only child, my pride, my legacy. I had raised him alone after his father passed away when Eric was just 7. Everything I ever did, every extra shift, every skipped meal, every tear I didn't let him see, was for him. So, when I called him that day, thinking he'd drop everything to help his mother, I expected compassion. What I got instead was a dagger through the heart. "Mom, I'm busy right now," he said, his voice tight with irritation. "You'll figure something out. You always do." He didn't even ask how I was, didn't ask if I needed food, or if I was in pain, or if I could get out of bed without falling. He just dismissed me, like an inconvenience. I was too stunned to say much. I just mumbled, "All right," and hung up. I sat there in my small living room, surrounded by silence, my pill bottles rattling in the plastic bag beside me. My vision blurred, not from the stroke, but from tears. How had we gotten here? Where was the boy who used to beg to sleep in my bed during thunderstorms? The teenager who'd hug me tight after every football game, win or lose? When did I become a burden to the very person I had sacrificed everything for? That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying every moment of his childhood. I remembered working 2 jobs to afford his tuition. I remembered driving 4 hours to surprise him on his birthday in college. I remembered emptying out half my retirement to help with the down payment on his house. And now, he couldn't even be bothered to call and check on me. A week passed. I hired a part-time caregiver, using funds I had set aside for emergencies. Every time I saw that young woman walk through my door to help me bathe or make a simple meal, I felt a mix of shame and fury. Shame because I had to rely on a stranger. Fury because my son, my blood, had made me feel invisible. Then came the moment that twisted the knife even deeper. I overheard him on the phone with his wife. My caregiver had stepped out to take a call, and I was resting in the living room when I accidentally hit the speaker button on my old landline phone. It rang. It connected. And I heard his voice. "I just don't want to deal with her, Jess," he said, exasperated. "She's old, stubborn, and needy, and don't even get me started on her money. If we're lucky, we'll get a good chunk once she's gone." A pause. Then laughter. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the words. It was the ease with which he said them. Cold, calculated, like I was some investment he was waiting to cash in. The room swam around me. My fingers went numb. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers. But instead, something inside me shifted. Snapped even. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was war. I had spent a lifetime giving. Now I was going to take back control. He thought I was weak. He thought I was disposable. He thought he knew what was in my will. He had no idea. For the next few days, I moved through my house like a ghost. Everything felt colder, my bed, my meals, even the sunlight that used to warm my kitchen table in the mornings. I couldn't stop replaying Eric's words in my head. "If we're lucky, we'll get a good chunk once she's gone." That one sentence stripped away every memory, every ounce of love I had clung to over the years. It wasn't just that he didn't want to care for me. It was that he saw my death as a payday. I had known Eric had changed over the years. His calls had grown infrequent. His visits rare. He always had an excuse: work, the kids, traffic. But I chalked it up to life. People get busy, I told myself. He still loves me. But this wasn't distance. This was indifference laced with greed. And the worst part? I had been preparing to leave everything to him. Every asset, every account, every bit of the modest fortune I had built from years of hard work and careful saving, the house, my investments, even the vintage jewelry passed down from my mother. It was all going to him, because I believed he would honor my memory. I believed he would take care of my legacy the way I had taken care of him. I felt sick. That evening, I pulled out my old wooden lockbox from the top of the closet. Inside were my most important documents, my will, my banking information, the deed to the house, and a handwritten letter I had planned to have read aloud at my memorial. I read the letter, and the words mocked me. Eric, I'm so proud of the man you've become. I hope you use what I leave you to continue building a beautiful life with your family. I tore it in half. No, he wasn't getting another ounce of praise from me. I looked over my will, reading every line. I hadn't updated it in almost 5 years. Back then, I still saw Eric as my loyal son. I had never imagined I'd need to consider why someone deserved to inherit my life's work. But now, I had no choice. That next morning, while my caregiver was making breakfast, I asked her to drive me to my lawyer's office. I hadn't left the house in days, and my legs still trembled when I stood. But I was done being passive. You sure you're up for this, Ms. Langford? She asked gently, seeing me steady myself against the doorframe. I looked her in the eyes. I've never been more sure of anything. Sitting in the lawyer's office, surrounded by polished wood and the scent of paper and ink, I told Mr. Andrews, who had been my legal counsel for over a decade, that I wanted to rewrite my entire will. Are you certain, Evelyn? He asked, brows raised behind his glasses. You've always wanted to leave everything to your son. I nodded slowly. Not anymore. We went line by line, tearing down the legacy I had planned to give a man who saw me as nothing more than a $sign. I didn't erase Eric completely. I knew better than to make my intentions too obvious just yet. But I made significant changes. Some things would go to charity, some to the community center where I'd volunteered for 20 years. A generous sum would be held in trust for my grandkids, but only accessible under very specific conditions that couldn't be manipulated by their father. And the rest? Let's just say I had something very particular in mind. But this wasn't just about money. It was about principle, about justice, about waking up from a dream and realizing the people you love can also be the ones who hurt you the deepest. Eric thought I was old and easy to manipulate, that I'd just lie down and wait to die, leaving him a fortune as a parting gift. But he had underestimated me. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I had spent years making sure that Eric never felt the weight of financial worries. I sacrificed everything for him. But now, it wasn't just about the money. It was about self-respect. It was about the fact that, at my age, I had no time to waste, no time to let someone who should have been my greatest ally continue to disrespect me. I thought about the life I had built, the many sleepless nights I spent to make sure he had everything he needed. When his father passed, I made the decision that Eric would want for nothing, and I would work tirelessly to make sure he never felt the sting of hardship. I didn't want him to feel the weight of loss the way I did. So, I gave him everything. My time, my resources, my heart. Every moment I could, I put him first. But somewhere along the way, the dynamic had shifted. Eric had grown up, and in doing so, he had grown distant. I thought it was just the normal course of life. A son stepping into adulthood, a child starting a family of his own. But when I took a step back and saw his actions for what they truly were, I realized just how wrong I had been. This wasn't just about my personal feelings. It was about my legacy that he was so casually willing to toss aside for a quick payday. If I allowed this to happen, if I allowed him to walk all over me, I would not only lose my dignity, but the message I sent to the people around me would be far worse. I wasn't just letting him take my hard-earned money. I was showing the world that I could be manipulated, that I could be disregarded, that I wasn't worth fighting for. And that's not the kind of message I wanted to send. Not after everything I had been through. I realized that what hurt most wasn't just the betrayal, but the fact that he thought I was incapable of seeing his true colors. It was as though I had become invisible in his eyes. I'd been his mother, his guide, his protector, and yet, all that mattered to him now was what I could provide after I was gone. That was the point where everything changed. I thought back to the years I spent making sure his world was secure. The extra hours I worked to put him through school when I could have been home with him. The trips I made to the bank to open savings accounts in his name when he was just a boy, hoping one day he'd appreciate the financial wisdom I was giving him. The sacrifices that kept me up at night. Those things should have meant something. But now to him, it was all just a means to an end. That's when I decided he would not get away with this. My entire life had been lived under the assumption that family would be my safety net when I needed it most. But Eric had pulled that net out from beneath me. He was no longer the son I raised. He had become a stranger, driven by greed and entitlement. And, as much as it hurt to admit it, I realized this was no longer about healing the wound. This was about finding justice. I had the power, the resources, and the knowledge to take back control of my future. I knew how to play this game better than he ever could. He underestimated me, thinking I was too old, too weak, or too sentimental to fight back. But I wasn't just angry anymore. I was empowered. He had given me the fuel I needed to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my sense of purpose. I had to expose him for what he really was, a man willing to turn his back on the very person who gave him everything. A man who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone to his own wealth. And I was going to make sure he paid for it. I stood up from the kitchen table where I had been planning my next steps, a surge of determination flowing through me. I wasn't going to let him continue to take advantage of me. I wasn't going to let him think that just because I had been a mother, I had to keep forgiving him. The time for silence was over. It was one thing to be hurt. It was another to be humiliated. But what I couldn't tolerate, what I wouldn't tolerate, was being used. Eric saw me as a transaction, not a person. And if he wanted to treat me like a business deal, then he was about to see how ruthless I could be. I spent the next week drafting the plan. It started with a meeting at the bank. I reviewed all of my accounts, checking, savings, investments, the safe deposit box. I removed Eric as the secondary account holder on everything. I made sure there wasn't a single signature, access code, or linked email that gave him even a whisper of control. Then I set up a new trust account, locked with specific legal stipulations, one that couldn't be touched without proof of caregiving, time spent, and documentation of support provided. He wouldn't meet the conditions even if he tried to. Fake them. Next, I contacted my lawyer again and asked to finalize the updated will. But I added a clause, one that would change everything. I want him to think he's still inheriting it all, I told Mr. Andrews, who gave me a slow, thoughtful look. But the bulk of my estate, house, investments, everything, will go to charity if he fails to meet the conditions. And those conditions are? He asked, intrigued. I smiled. That he takes care of me personally for 6 straight months, not through a paid service, not through his wife. Him. Meals, doctor visits, companionship, real caregiving. If he doesn't, he gets the bare minimum allowed by law. The lawyer chuckled. That's clever. Some would say manipulative. I raised an eyebrow. So was raising a son who's waiting for me to die. Andrews drafted everything exactly how I wanted. It was airtight. Now came the psychological part. I needed Eric to believe everything was still going according to his plan, that he was going to be rich, untouched, and guilt-free. That meant acting like nothing had changed. I resumed the occasional, warm text message, hope you're doing well, missing the grandkids, and even one meek little, wish you could visit soon. I made sure I sounded just desperate enough to keep him comfortable in his assumption. He responded the way I expected, polite, distant, and insincere. Hang in there, Mom. We'll try to swing by soon. Busy this weekend? Maybe next month. I'll call you later, okay? He never did. But I saved every message. I printed them. I logged the dates. I kept a record of each time I reached out, and each time he failed to respond or follow through. I also began documenting my medical visits and caregiving arrangements, who came, when, and why Eric wasn't involved, just in case he decided to argue later. I wasn't just preparing emotionally, I was building a case, brick by brick. Then, I made one last move. I reached out to the director of the local charity I had been involved with for years, a women's shelter. Quietly, I arranged for a large portion of my estate to be transferred to them upon my passing, if Eric failed to meet the requirements. The director cried when I told her. I didn't. My son's already thrown me away, I said. At least this way, someone will benefit who actually cares about people. I wasn't out for revenge just for the sake of it. I wanted to send a message. To him, yes, but also to myself. That I was no one's victim. That I still had the power to make choices. That I mattered. He thought he had me cornered. That he had outgrown me, outsmarted me, and would eventually outlive me with a fortune in his pocket. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I had already flipped the script. He wasn't the puppet master. He was the pawn. The real challenge wasn't rewriting the will or creating legal safeguards. It was executing the plan without tipping my hand. Revenge, true revenge, isn't about theatrics. It's about control. Quiet, deliberate control. The first step was observation. I began tracking everything. I documented every time Eric failed to visit. I noted every promise broken, every ignored call. My caregiver, Maria, was more than willing to help me record it all. She had overheard enough phone conversations and seen enough tears to understand what was going on. Let's make sure the world sees the truth, she said, handing me a notebook. She helped organize. Each page marked with dates, missed calls, text messages, and even photos of me alone at doctor's visits, sitting quietly in waiting rooms while Eric claimed he was too busy. Step 2. I gave him rope. I began to send friendly little nudges. Had a hard night last night. Would love to talk. Doctor says I need someone with me next week. Are you free? Miss you, sweetheart. He ignored most of them. The ones he responded to were always vague and dismissive. Wish I could help, but the kids have soccer. Work is insane lately. Maybe next month. Have you tried talking to a nurse? Each message was a gift, honestly. They documented who he was without me having to lift a finger. I forwarded everyone to my lawyer and printed a copy for my records. Then came step 3. I started sharing more stories with people in our community. Not dramatic ones, just the truth, served with a calm, sorrowful face. At church, at the grocery store, on the phone with old friends. Eric's just so busy these days. I asked for help with the garage light, but I guess he couldn't make it over again. I understand. He has a lot on his plate. People listened. People noticed. Word spreads fast in quiet communities, especially when it drips like water over stone. I wasn't out to ruin him socially, but I knew how to plant doubt in the minds of those who used to admire him. The golden son, the family man, the one who took such good care of his mom. By the time he finally showed up, unannounced, with his phone in hand and a rushed smile, I had been waiting. Hey, Mom, thought I'd surprise you, he said, stepping inside like he owned the place. Thought maybe we could hang out for a bit, catch up. I looked at him with a calm I hadn't felt in months. Of course, I'd love to spend some time together. He stayed for 20 minutes, took a few selfies with me, posted one on Facebook with the caption, "Nothing. Like spending time with the woman who made me who I am." I printed it, saved the metadata, added it to the file. Step 4 was making peace with the fact that I didn't need to change him. I wasn't trying to teach him a lesson. That ship had sailed. I had only one goal left, to ensure he didn't benefit from my suffering. I made appointments with 2 independent witnesses, people who had seen my mental competence, who could vouch that I made my decisions freely. I wanted no room for contesting the will. I even recorded a video, smiling, composed, explaining why I was doing what I was doing. If you're watching this, I said, then I'm no longer here. But rest assured, this was my choice. I wanted my legacy to go to those who gave me love, time, and respect, not to someone who only remembered me when there was money to collect. And then, I waited. I kept living my life quietly, with dignity. I kept volunteering as best I could. I wrote letters to my grandchildren, storing them in envelopes with their names on them. Letters they'd open long after I was gone. Letters filled with love, wisdom, and nothing but warmth. Because the one thing Eric would never take from me was my love for them. I wouldn't punish them for his mistakes, but I would protect them from the same manipulations I had endured. The final steps were in place. All that remained now was the confrontation. And I was ready. The day of the reading came faster than I expected. I had passed peacefully in my sleep, Maria told everyone later. No pain, no drama, just a quiet release. And yet, even in death, I had one final act to deliver. Eric walked into the lawyer's office with the swagger of a man who thought he'd won. He brought his wife, dressed in designer black, like a woman already spending the money in her mind. They exchanged smug glances with each polite nod to the staff. He had no idea what was waiting for him. Mr. Andrews began the reading in a solemn tone. The room was silent, except for the rustle of paper and the ticking of a wall clock. I, Margaret Elaine Rowe, being of sound mind and clear memory. Eric leaned back in his chair, his arms folded, waiting. It started as he expected, mentions of the house, the accounts, the assets. Then came the shift. Do leave the entirety of my estate to my only son, Eric Rowe, pending one condition, that he personally, directly, and consistently provided care, companionship, and support during the final phase of my life, as documented and verified by my legal representative. Eric sat up. Wait, what? Andrews continued, unbothered. As detailed in this document, evidence has been presented that Mr. Rowe failed to provide care on multiple documented occasions. As such, per the conditions of the will, the estate shall instead be transferred to the Margot Haven Women's Shelter, a charitable organization close to my heart. Silence. His wife gasped. Eric's mouth hung open. That can't be legal, he said, half laughing, half panicked. That's ridiculous. I visited. I posted about it. I have pictures. Andrews didn't flinch. A single social media post does not constitute caregiving. We have logs, messages, witness statements, and even video footage. Your mother prepared thoroughly. Eric's face turned red. She wouldn't do that. She wouldn't leave everything to strangers. She didn't, Andrews replied calmly. She left it to people who cared. It wasn't just about the money. That was never the point. It was about truth. It was about finally making him see who he had become, and showing him that actions have consequences, even when they come, wrapped in a silk tie and a confident smile. He tried to contest the will. Of course he did, but every corner he turned, there was another wall of documentation waiting. Every lie he told was already disproven. Every excuse unraveled in front of him. It wasn't a courtroom drama. It was a slow, meticulous collapse. When the dust settled, he was left with nothing but a modest, legally mandated inheritance, barely enough to cover the cost of his attorney. Meanwhile, the shelter used the estate to open a new wing, Margaret's Place, dedicated to housing older women who had no one left to turn to. A plaque on the wall bore my name, but more importantly, it bore my story. And the grandkids? I'd written them each a letter. Letters filled with memories, recipes, jokes, and love. Each one ended the same way. Always choose kindness. And always remember, people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Eric tried to paint me as bitter, but the truth followed him like a shadow. Our community saw. They remembered. He wasn't the man he had pretended to be. The social invitations slowed. The small talk faded. People crossed the street instead of shaking his hand. He lost more than money. He lost respect. And once that's gone, it rarely comes back. As for me, I got the last word. Not out of pettiness, but out of power. Out of the deep need to be seen, heard, and valued. He thought I was weak, but I had simply been patient. And in the end, karma didn't need to come knocking. I had already opened the door.